Sculpture is one of the only activities that lays outside of the use of materials in a functional world. You know, everything else is pretty boring and repetitive. Sculpture is not about practicalities. It doesn't have to be functional. Only sculpture takes on forms that just grow into space and become psychological and emotional in their expression. I went to art school in 1969 and I entered without having an initial interest in sculpture, entered into this because it was such a dynamic, interesting thing to do. And I found it was an amazing activity just to move the material around, just to make things. It was an emotional experience to move material, but also one that changed one's own ideas. I wanted to make very, very simple things because I had the belief that anything one made had a kind of emotional quality and had a meaning. And it, you know, even tying knots in things, giving things a form. Everything we see has a form that is sort of, in a way, the material is very clever. It's calculated itself. I never thought of material as something you use to represent something else. The material was something in itself, and that applied to all materials. I can see the effect of the late 70s on me, looking for some more deeper emotional quality to the material, or trying to show the deeper emotional quality of the material I was working with, and that had immediately, if you like, psychological or at times even social ramifications. What I try to show for my own excitement is just to see what's happening, you know, what the dynamic, the internal energy and the meaning of that is in the material. And I think when we see something, we have a psychological pressure to see beyond the surface. And in looking beyond the surface, we want to find out what those energies are. And we interpret or we guess at what these energies are. And that is really a great part of looking at the world in general, but a very important part of looking at sculpture. And what I try to do in my work is to use the surface as a way of indicating what's underneath the surface. And therefore, what I make is not chaotic. I try to have a kind of formal system that is inside the work. With an internal formal construction, I build it up until it has an emotional quality. And the more complicated those geometries become, the more energetic and dynamic the material. There's an enormous number of materials you can put in museums and galleries, get outside and it just gets blown away by the wind. But I very rarely make work which is, I'd say, structural. I always want to have a relationship of the material to the form. It doesn't really change very much from one space to the other, but it does change the space. People tend to think of sculpture being something static and slowly developing and heavy. I saw it as the contrary. I mean, sculpture is this fantastic, quickly developing and dynamic activity, which is generally, as an activity, as a human activity, I think it's a very, very important activity. I think it's one that gives material value and forms value. I'm surprised myself at the way, the twists and turns that the material's taken me on, yeah.